In this class of business environment and ethical practices, we'll be learning about interest rate structure. Before we go to the what exactly interest rate structure is, let's have a basic understanding of what all parties are involved wherein this interest rate structure is utilized. First party is the central bank of any country, RBI, Reserve Bank of India in our case. Second is the commercial banks. Commercial banks are the public sector or private banks which acts as a mediary in between the RBI and the general public. And third party is the general public. All the commercial banks in a country are governed by the central bank. And central bank does transact with the commercial banks, and commercial bank transacts with the general public. In most of the cases, RBI or the central bank does not transact with the general public directly, and it doesn't transact at all. There are certain provisions have been seen in the world, in the like certain countries wherein the central bank can issue securities which can be bought directly, but the incidences are rare. In most of the cases, these are bought through the commercial banks only. So there are three main parties here, and amongst them, this interest rate structure and within the economy, it exists. The term structure of interest rate is the relationship between the interest rate or bond yields and different terms or maturities. The term structure of interest rates is also known as a yield curve, and it plays a central role in an economy. The basic idea is to understand what exactly is the term of the investment and how or what amount of return or yield will be given or will be received on that particular investment within a specified frame of time. These yield curves could be of three types. A normal or upsloped yield curves indicates yields on longer term bonds may continue to rise, responding to periods of economic expansion. When investors expect longer maturity bond yields to become even higher in the future, many would temporarily park their funds in shorter term securities in hopes of purchasing longer term bonds later for higher yields. In a rising interest rate environment, it is risky to have investments tied up in longer term bonds when their value has yet to decline as a result of higher yields over the time. The increasingly temporary demand for short term securities pushes their yields even lower, setting in motion a steeper upsloped normal yield curve. So that depending upon the prospects of getting a higher return will actually drive the entire investment path for long term or short term bonds. Second shape could be inverted yield curves, wherein an inverted or down-sloped yield curve undoubtedly suggests yields on lower-term bonds may continue to fall, corresponding to periods of economic recession. When investors expect longer maturity bond yields to become even lower in the future, many would purchase longer maturity bonds to lock in yields before they decrease further. So it is just opposite of what we talked about earlier. The increasing onset of demand for longer maturity bonds or and the lack of demand for short-term security leads to higher prices but lower yields on longer maturity bonds, and lower prices but higher yields on short-term securities, further inverting a down slope yield curve. Last but not the least is flat, and it might not be exactly flat, and it may fluctuate, but only a little bit. A flat yield curve may arise from normal or inverted yield curve depending on changing economic conditions. When the economy is transitioning from expansion to slower development and even recession, yields on longer maturity bonds tend to fall, and yields on short-term securities likely rise, inverting a normal yield curve into a flat yield curve. When the economy is transitioning from recession to recovery and potentially expansion, Yields on the longer maturity bonds are set to rise, and yields on short-term maturity securities are sure to fall, tilting an inverted yield curve towards a flat yield curve. Let's have a look at the key interest rates or the key figures which matters the most here. First is cash reserve ratio, CRR. It refers to the minimum percentage of a bank's total deposit required to be kept with the central bank. Commercial banks have to keep with the central bank a certain percentage of their deposit in the form of cash reserves as a matter of law. And there are no exceptions, and these reserves are kept in the form of cash only. And RBI uses CRR as a monetary policy tool when they have to check the level of liquidity, money flow, or inflation in the market. Another one is statutory liquidity ratio. Every bank is required to maintain a fixed percentage of its assets in the form of cash or other liquid assets. And this percentage, this ratio is called SLR. The rate of SLR, just like CRR, has to be fixed by the central bank. Here, the bank is supposed to keep the reserves with themselves. It is not required to be submitted or to be capped with the RBI, but it has to be maintained for sure, else it will be considered a violation of law. Then comes repo rate. To control repo rate is the rate at which RBI lends money to commercial banks against the pledge of government securities whenever the banks are in need of funds to meet their day-to-day obligations. To control inflation and the growth, RBI uses certain tools like CRR, SLR, repo rate, and reverse repo rate. Let's have a look at what reverse repo rate means. Reverse repo rate refers to the rate of interest at which commercial banks can park their surplus funds with the central bank of the country. Reverse repo rate is fixed by the central bank and revised from time to time depending upon the monetary situation in the country. If the funds are lying with the commercial banks, like unused funds, they can surely park it with the with the uh, with the RBI so that they can earn a specific amount of interest on those reserves or on those unused funds. The reverse repo and repo both are determined by the central bank, and reverse repo is always lesser than repo rate. These are the key interest rates as on 6th of August 2020. CRR is 3%. It has been reduced uh, in view of COVID-19. Earlier it was 4%. SLR has been reduced to 18.50. Earlier it was 20. And both these ratios have been reduced as a part of monetary policy in order to give higher liquidity to the commercial banks so that they can lend more and more. Repo rate is at 4 and reverse repo is at 3.35%, and marginal standing facility rate is 4.65%. It is the rate at which government gives very short term loans to the commercial banks, or not government, the RBI. And then comes bank rate. Like repo rate is basically used in terms of securities, while when normal lending is done by the RBI to the commercial bank, bank rate is used there. So as of now, bank rate is 4.65%. Thank you.